Hello, and welcome to Improbable Things. I'm J. Grace Pennington, and this is my podcast where I share 6 improbable thoughts before breakfast, which is 6 thoughts about reading, writing, or science fiction. And you might hear some sounds in the background because I'm getting a little bit of a later start because my alarm went off and I must have fallen back asleep after that for a little while. Still not entirely clear on what happened, but my kids are probably going to be waking up and making a little bit of noise, but that's okay, that's life. So we are going to dive into these 6 improbable thoughts for today. Number 1, I've mentioned that I've been working on the 8th Firmament book, Eleftheria and Humanoid, and it's been going great. I've been working just about every day on it, and I've also, on the days I am working, I'm managing to surpass the necessary word count so that the days that I'm not quite able to get to it, I've still been able to keep up. I've been able to compensate for those. And yesterday I broke 10,000 words, which is awesome. Usually the Firmament books end up being a little under 50,000. So let's say that's about, close to like a fifth of the way through, which feels good. I think that's some good progress. And I'm well into the 2nd chapter, and the 3rd chapter is usually about where things really take off. The first couple are more kind of about setting things up, and about just kind of getting a foreshadowing of what the book's going to be about, just really setting the groundwork. So about to get to the exciting part pretty soon here, and I am really enjoying still in the part where I am just loving being back in this place with these characters, not quite to the part yet where I'm sick of everything and just want to never look at it again. So I'll get there, but for now it's been fun. So number 2, I mentioned last week that I'm needing to get beta reading done for the 7th book, Eleftheria, which I finished in January. And one thing I struggle with when I am looking for beta readers is that I'm so torn between really wanting, obviously, and needing the feedback. And there's a lot of people that I know would give really valuable feedback, just either because I really value their story sensibilities or because they are people that I know love the series and could really help me. And so I want that. But then there's also part of me that goes, but I want them to see it in its pretty finished format. I want them to see it when it's done and have the full experience. I don't want to ruin it with showing them in its sort of still messy state. So I'm having to sort through that right now. And in the past, I've always read my books to my husband after they've been published, which, I've only published, I think, maybe 2 or 3 books since we've been married, and so it was some of them obviously just had to be that way. They were already published when I met him, but for the others I've still always waited until after they were completely done to read them to him. But he really does have a really good sense of story, and when I've read him shorter things, like I've read him some of my short stories when they've not been quite, when they've been in 1st or 2nd drafts, and he's given really, really valuable feedback, and I really respect his thoughts about story and structure, and he has a good eye for where things don't make sense or aren't quite right. And so we talked about it, and I'm gonna go ahead and read him Eleftheria while it's not there yet so that I can get the benefit of that feedback. But he doesn't really care. He likes my books, but I'm someone who I think values specific experiences and having specific experiences more than he does. I'll always be like, oh, I don't want, my kids to watch this movie yet or whatever, because I want us to sit down and watch it together sometime and share the experience together. And he doesn't really care about that. He's like, yep, that's a great movie, let him watch it. We just have a different view on those things. So for him, he wants to hear the story, but he also wants to be able to help me with it. And he's like, well, that makes the most sense, let's just do that. So that's what I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna need to get past my, I don't know if it's pride or what, of having people just see the finished product, which of course still isn't perfect, but let a few people see it in its need for some polishing and let them help me with it. So I'm going to be working on that. Number 3, there's going to be a lot of firmament stuff today because that's just what I'm really in the middle of right now. But my third thought is it is very difficult in a series of this length, and especially when the writing of it is spread out over so many years. I mean, I wrote the first one, let's see, I think I was 21 when I wrote the first book, and I'm 31 now, so you can do that math. And the having to have continuity across all of these stories and books is very difficult. And I started at one point because I would think, I probably have already said who, fills this position on the ship in another book, so I need to make sure it's the same person, or, obviously some of those positions can change, but there needs to be some continuity. I need to be, if I said, the second engineer was Lieutenant Payne in one book, and then I say something completely different in the next book, it's just nice if you can look at it. It makes it seem more realistic if you're like, oh yes, I remember that person, or whatever. And there's a lot of other things. And anyway, I started making a document at one point to keep track of those things, and I never finished doing that. So I'm sure there's a lot of things that are not good continuity, but there's some things that also my other problem is that I really don't like world building. I know many, many people love it, especially lovers of fantasy and science fiction, but I do not enjoy that part where you sit down and just fill out the details of your world and how it works. So I usually kind of make up the world building as I go along, which I'm sure is not the best way to do it. But that also does mean I really should be at least keeping track of what I make up, even if I'm not doing it ahead of time, because it needs to at least be the same. So things like when I went to write Gestern, I was like, I've never even really addressed what the governments on Earth looks like. What is going on back there? How is everything politically? How is the world developed? What is technology like on Earth? Things like that. And so I had to work on that for the first time. And it needed to make sense with other things, that I'd mentioned maybe just offhand in some of the other books. So there's a lot of those kinds of things. And even just yesterday when I was writing, I had Andy go to get a snack from the snack bar, and I was like, I remember that when I first started these books, they're instead of them, whatever keeps their food cold, instead of just calling it a refrigerator, I wanted them to have something that would keep some foods cold and some foods hot, because that seemed more cool and technologically advanced. So I had that. And then I'm I don't remember what I called that thing though. I feel like it was something pretty basic, like a temp regulator or something. But then I'm thinking, didn't I make up something more slang-ish? Because that sounds like a mouthful every time you want to go get something. What would they call it if that? So anyway, I'm you know what? I need to go back in the first book and just look at and see, what did I call that thing that they get their food out of that regulates the temperature? Because I don't remember. And I don't want, especially people that may read them faster than I'm writing them, to, go wait, didn't they call it this? I'm sure there'll be some of those things, and that's fine to a certain extent. And I think in small ways it can even be kind of fun trivia, because I enjoy that kind of thing. In Star Trek, which often does have horrendous continuity, it's kind of fun. It makes you feel like part of the in crowd when you can go, oh yes, that's not right. But if it's too much, it just takes you out of the story, and that's definitely not what I want. So I'm gonna have to really sit down at some point. I don't know when I would ever have time for this, but sit down and just make a document with things like that, terms for things, what different positions are called on the ship, the political situation on Earth or whatever, all those things, and just be able to refer back to it when I need it. That's really what I need to do, but will it happen? I don't know. Number 4, still on the firmament subject, I finally emailed my cover artist to talk about doing the cover for Eleftheria, and I know that, since he started work on the series, his life has changed a lot. He has an actual day job, he has kids, he just, things are different. And so I was just oh, is he even gonna have time for this anymore? How is this gonna go? It's been a while since he did a cover for me. I'm just I don't want to presume that this is still something he's able or interested, But it went great. I reached out to him, said, here's my budget, here's kind of basically what I need for the cover, let me know. I'm really flexible as to the deadline. I have an idea of when I'd like to publish, but it's much more important to me to work with the people that I'm working with well, and all of us, have day jobs. My formatter, we all have other things going in our lives besides this, and so I want to be always sensitive to that more than to my deadlines, because it's really important to me to work with these people if I can, because they've done such good work for me and for the series. So I told him all that, and he replied really quickly and said that that sounded great, and kind of gave me an outline of how he'd like to work on it, the process. And so I just need to let him know a little more about what exactly I want on the cover and go from there. And I'm really excited about that because he is an amazing artist and has done such a beautiful job on the artwork for the series. And I really hope that we can always make it work despite the rest of life, because I want the rest of the series to have that same beautiful look. And he does a great job. So I can't wait for that to be finished, to be able to see it myself, of course, and to show it to all of y'all. So number 5, finally moving on, I wanted to talk about my currently reading. So I think I mentioned a while back I was rereading the Divergent series and really overall enjoying the first couple of books. So now I've moved on the last few days to reading the third book, Allegiant, which is the one that I've never read before. So I watched the movie back when it came out, which was I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, at least. And the movie was not, I don't really remember anything about the movie except that it was not good, and that apparently it was only half of the story, and I guess they were going to split in two like they have with other young adult trilogies and go back and tell the second half later, but then that first part of it was so bad that they, I guess, couldn't do it. Which is always sad when stuff like that happens. But anyway, so I hadn't read the third book, and I because of my weird thing where I literally don't remember anything about a movie after I've just seen it once, the book is not spoiled for me because I just have no idea what's going to happen next. So all that to say, it's what I'm reading now, and I'm about halfway through, and honestly, I'm not liking or enjoying it as much as the first two, and it suffers from something I feel like I've seen definitely before, but in a lot of young adult books, and I'm not sure why it tends to be this way. In this series, I want to say maybe it's because it was a younger, maybe more inexperienced author, but I really don't have any idea if that's why, because also there's young adult series that are written by older authors that have written a lot of other things that I've seen the problem with even worse. But all that to say, here's the problem I see with it. In the third book, it's just become overcomplicated, and it feels like there was not a plan for this book, and it just kind of got to this point, and she had to try to piece something together that would make it all make sense, and it doesn't quite make sense, but also it just is too complicated. It turns out I feel like she's trying to resolve some of these, continuity type things by saying, oh yes, all these things that you were told before were actually a lie, which sometimes obviously that's fine and a good twist, but you do it a lot. And especially I saw this happen in Maze Runner as the worst example I've ever seen of this, but it goes back and forth so much that you can't really enjoy it or even really take it in, because at a certain point, you'd be like, okay, so this person's telling me this story about what's going on. So, okay. Oh, and then another person comes along and says, actually, that was all a lie. And here's this version of what's going on. And then somebody else comes along and says, no, that was all a lie. And this is the real version of what's going on. And that happens over and over. And you start to just be like, well, I'm just not going to believe anything now. I don't even have any idea who to trust, which it can be done in a good way where you don't know who to trust, but you have to have something to ground it in. You have to be like, okay, at some point you have to pick a side and find some kind of truth. It just becomes overwhelming, I think. And it also then, there's kind of all new characters for the most part, surrounding characters, and it's too many of them were introduced too fast. I don't really get a great feel for who they are as people, and almost all, other than a small handful, the rest of the characters you're used to are all gone, and it doesn't feel as tight, it doesn't feel as compelling as the first two. And I don't know. I'm really hoping it will get better in the second half, but I'm just kind of feeling blah about it so far because of that. And then also in this book, she decided to. So the first two were first person present tense from the perspective of the protagonist Triss. And like I said, I normally don't like first person present tense, but I think that she did a good job, and it doesn't bother me in the first two books. But in the third book, she goes back and forth between Triss's perspective and the perspective of her boyfriend Tobias, and it can be done well where you're switching perspectives. And certainly I think changing up perspectives in a series can go well, and I hope it can, because I did some of that in Firmament book 6, No Man. But in this case, I don't know what it is, but I cannot get into it, and I'm constantly forgetting as I'm reading which person's perspective this is from. And I think it must because I recently read another book that was constantly changing perspectives. Like it was probably told from like 20 different people's perspectives, and some of them you would just see their point of view for one chapter and then never hear from them again. So I feel like that should have been, or had the potential to be, very confusing, but it wasn't. And I think that author did a great job of differentiating between what you're hearing from the different people. I was never confused. And in this book, in Allegiant, I'm constantly confused. I'm forgetting, am I hearing this from Triss's point of view or Tobias's? Like, whose head are we in right now? And I think I can only assume that's because they both just sound the same. That the narration and the way things are being said and the feelings that are being put across are the same kind of for both of them, which is not how it should be. And I think that's another part of what is confusing me, is because Triss's perspective feels very realistic to a girl and her situation and her age and what she's been through and all of that. And honestly, I feel like Tobias's point of view and being in his head also sounds kind of like a girl of that age in that situation. And it does not sound like what you've seen of him before, which is this like strong, like, damaged man, blah blah blah. Like it sounds still like a girl to me. Once you're in his head. And so I don't know. So far, not loving it, which is disappointing because I really did love the other two. But maybe it will redeem itself in the second half of the book. We'll see. And so number 6 is related to that, and also related to a meme that I've seen going around a lot lately. I've seen it shared several times, and every time it kind of bugs me. And I could not find it to give you the exact wording, but basically it goes like this. It's like someone says, "Oh, I read this book and it wasn't good because it felt like the author was just making it up as they went along." And then someone responds, "Well, I don't know how to tell you this," or "I don't know who's going to tell you," or whatever. Basically, the point being, all authors make stories up as they go along. Like, that's a silly complaint or whatever, is kind of obviously the gist of it. And I do not like the meme for a couple of reasons. For one thing, I think it's not true that all authors make things up as they go along. Now, obviously, they make it all up, but I think it's the as they go along part that really deserves to be singled out, because some authors do that, make it up as they go along, and it's great, and then they're really good at it, and the product is wonderful. And then there's a lot of authors that don't do that and outline and plan more, and either way is fine. But the point is that when you're reading it, it should not feel like it was being made up as you go along.